Welcome back to our holistic home health podcast, where we're all about educating and informing you on an environmental and molecular level about how you can live and maintain a healthier home. So just really want to serve and educate you in this area. So today is going to be our Q&A episode. So we'll have a couple of these periodically where we just want to answer commonly heard questions that we get either from you online or directly over the phone, just kind of so we can answer some of those questions that are coming up and give clarity around those and hopefully a little bit more information, just so you guys know how to move forward, and can also kind of decipher and discern when you're reading about different information online, just because there are so many different views on things, especially in the environmental space. So just want to use this space and this time for our Q&A episodes to just inform you more. So we have Barry Mankin.
Hi.
Dr. House. So excited to have you here.
AKA.
Yeah. AKA
Do you remember
Dr.
that
House.
show? Do you remember that show, Doctor?
Yeah, it's I'm a little bit young, but I do know this show. I do know I know
That
the
was
show.
one of my favorite shows.
Yeah, I know.
So
It's
not
one
that
of
we're
your
like
shows.
using that. So
Right. We're not trademarking it at all. Okay, well, Barry Mankin, the man on the subject. I have a list of questions that I kind of just want to ask you, and I actually feel like I'm going to get educated today.
Oh, fun.
Because a lot of these I'm like, I think I kind of know what this is, but I'd love to hear more. So the first one I want to ask about is the ERMI test. A lot of people, I'm typically going to hear like ERMI test, and there's kind of controversy around it, but what I typically hear on the phone is people say, my doctor said to get an ERMI test. But that's not really like part of our process. So tell me a little bit about that test, what we should know, why it's helpful, why it's not helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. So basically, ERMI was designed as a research project, right?
Okay.
It was never completely studied to be effective within a home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was adopted by the EPA as part of a protocol for people to have an indicator for mold activity in a home, dust, etc. There's ERMI, there's EMA, so there's different ways that they look at that with dust sampling. But we don't, at least in my company, we don't, I guess, value that in the same way that other people do. So I think from a $300 cost and the limitations that it has, you can find a lot of things on a dust sample, but you're also going to spread a lot of things on a dust sample. So as an example, if we're using that for diagnosis for a home and we're taking a swipe sample on all the surfaces within the home, and the house is 2,500 square feet. So we're taking a sample, and a lot of ifs here, but like we have a source maybe. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to find sources, right? Yeah. If we have a source in a room and say it's like the bad stuff, maybe we're dealing with Stachybotrys or Chitomium or something like that, or anything mycotoxin related. We take a sample and then we take that source that we potentially don't even know is there, and then we spread that through the whole house. If it's only localized to one section and it hasn't already influenced the house, now it has. Now we're taking those spores and just spreading them through, or the whole room is contaminated, but the other side of the house or the other level of the house isn't contaminated. Now it is, right? So other than, and then we get HVAC involved with that. So there's one way that it is kind of a fallacy in trying to look for something initially within a home. The other is there's so many different reviews out there on from top scientists that tell us that it was never designed to do that. It is only to be used as an indicator, and it's really never been proven as a diagnosis for the whole house. So what they all say is nothing beats a good inspection of the home and a good assessment of the home. So if somebody wants to use that on the front end to say, hey, should we even call somebody? As long as they know they don't have any problems and they just want some indicators, fine. But know its limitations. It's like, Clint Eastwood, he's the famous philosopher, right?
I guess.
Got to know your limitations. So look that one up.
Totally.
But so we don't, the medical community uses that because it's in the EPA and it kind of covers their start process to help give somebody like something that they can
Point
do.
them in a direction.
Something.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
they just kind of
totally.
say, oh, the EPA says to do this, and not everything that the EPA says is like,
Right.
perfect. So, but that's one of those things that's just in there. But if you look at the fine print, it tells you in that same article that it's not meant to be used that way.
Right.
It's very, very limited. I could have brought something in here on my shoe, and there could be something on this carpet that
Yep.
I brought in, and it would stay there
Sorry,
for
guys.
years, dormant.
Wow.
And you could pick it up on Irmy and say, oh my gosh, we've got water damage in our house. But we don't know, right?
Right.
So again, and those are kind of extreme circumstances, but there's so many reasons not to do that.
Yeah, I see.
So anyway, we just don't value it in the same way.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So it kind of sounds like there's two main things that can be unhelpful with IRMI is like, one, it's only an indicator, so it's not super conclusive and like giving us a diagnosis.
Yeah,
And-
or a reason to do it like a remediation action or anything like that.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
yeah.
And then two, like cross-contamination. You risk
Yeah.
contaminating your
Absolutely.
home further.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Very helpful. Okay. Well, let's talk about air sampling because I also think there's a little bit of controversy around
Yeah,
this.
we're the two top ones that we hear all the time. Those are the
It
two big
is,
ones.
yeah. I will
Yeah.
often like be speaking with people and they're like, "Oh, you do air sampling? I heard that's not really good. Like, what can you see in the air?" So, what are we looking for when we're doing air sampling? Why is it an essential part of our process?
Yeah, so whenever we are taking samples, when we're doing what we call a baseline, we're going to do other things besides air sampling. Here's what happens, and this comes from the home inspection industry typically. At least it's where I should say it's been abused more. There's a lack of education, and this is kind of one of my pet peeves for the home inspection industry, but like there's a lack of education on why they're doing it in the first place. And here's how the scenario plays
Okay.
out. A home inspection, is ordered, and if they offer environmental, which our home inspection company does, we just speak to it with more authority. But the idea is they'll say, okay, this is a way to make money, and this is how they target the home inspection industry. You'll have a lab that wants volume, and there's specific ones that I won't mention, but
Okay.
that aren't very credible, but. They will target the home inspection industry, and they'll go after and say, hey, you can make more money by just getting air samples and clearing their house for mold or tell them there's a problem.
Yeah.
The problem is, A, they don't know, half of them don't know why they're doing it, so there's no context. B, they don't know how to interpret the lab results to tell you what it means between one mold and another mold, or what's normal ecology, what's not normal ecology,
Right.
deal with sensitized clients and what they might need, and be able to speak to that with any authority, because all they're doing is checking a box with some measly
Did an air
certification that they can get in
sample
30
check.
minutes
Yeah.
at a convention to say, okay, you're certified to test for mold now, buy our machine, buy our
Totally.
samples, and give us some work. So that's not a conflict of interest at all.
Right.
So much less the accuracy of the results and the process and all that from certain labs. But so, and I'm generalizing these things, but like that's kind of how that happens. And so whenever somebody says that is more savvy, or somebody that has gone through this process and is, the public's a lot more educated than they used to be 10 years ago because of the pain points. I mean, people are sick. And in my opinion, it's a huge liability for the home inspection industry to be getting into that space without understanding those limitations of what they're giving. So people are paying
Right.
for that service with an expectation to say, hey, is there mold here or not? Well, there's mold everywhere, but, if you can't define that well, you shouldn't be sampling.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't be giving people that information. So, my opinion. So, but that's kind of how that happens. So what that does is that gives a huge stain, and that's just one way, but that gives a huge stain on air sampling because people think they approach it as the end-all be-all. Like, oh, okay, we tested your air, and so you're good. So you have no
Yep.
mold, and which is not always true. It can be, but it cannot be. So that just talks about what is in the air at that moment in time with the relative humidity and the pressure of the house and the season and the HVAC
Right.
conditions, and for 5 or 10 minutes within a space if it was placed in a optimal location. You know, and again, then what's on those lab results and if they're interpreted right. It's like a lot of things that go into that with intentionality to take an air sample to give it credibility to a point, right?
Right.
So again, it's good data. The reason that we do that for like a baseline, if we want to create a baseline, I want to see what somebody's breathing.
Right. Just
Because
day
at the end
in,
of the day,
day out,
how's
what
it
are you
getting to you?
exposed to? Yeah,
like
totally.
if something's obvious in the house and the air sampling is done the right way with, you know, calibrated machinery and all of that sort of thing, we'll see something.
Yep.
Or we'll have an indicator of something to say, okay, we shouldn't see these things. Or it's type and concentration that we're looking for.
Right.
Type and concentration always on the mold. And we'll see, you know, particulate counts go along with that within a room. The relative humidity goes along with that. So as an example, if it is winter,
Yep.
we're heating our homes, we're drying out our homes, and the air is lighter. If the air is lighter,
Right.
the particulates are lighter because the amount of moisture within any piece of matter that is normally buoyant,
It's going to make it.
now we
heavier.
have larger sizes that are more buoyant in the wintertime and more volume, typically, right? So now things could be settled out or they could be airborne, right? So
Yep.
all we're doing is it's a limited sample, but if something's obvious, that's our first delivery method. That's where most people get their problem is through the air. And so we value that from a percentage standpoint. That's your highest percentage of influence within your home is through the air. So we value that to a point, but we don't ever say, okay, you're clear.
This is
It
the
just
only thing.
means, along with a good inspection, to look at all the potentials and what those influences are and other parameters. And if somebody, again, what are the pain points, et cetera. We'll look at that, but it is a very good indicator. I found brand new houses with Stachybotrys in the air at high concentration.
Yep.
Stachybotrys needs time and it needs a lot of water. So if there's not something obvious, then how did that get in there?
Right.
Was that during the construction process? Was there a water damage that was hidden
Right.
during the construction process that happened, and then enough time and concentration to create that?
Was the lumber not dried out completely?
Yeah, I mean, and that gets a little bit controversial, but maybe. But typically, we're looking at other types with that, but that can happen. Is it an HVAC issue? Is there something inside the HVAC that is growing from condensation, from the
Right.
pan, from the whatever, and it's blowing things around? Did a painter bring a drop cloth in the couple of days before that was nasty and full of mold?
Something.
And now it's in that space. And if we have a sensitized person coming into that space,
Well, my mind is being blown. These are a lot of contributing factors adding
so like,
up.
little things like, so I've
Yeah,
seen
totally.
brand new houses with like, what is this here for? And then we got to figure that out. And then I've seen old houses that are great. And most of that influence has either been mitigated appropriately or it's just not presenting itself in the air. Now, is there history? Are things settled out? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, again, will that become lighter in the winter, or if a wind comes through and blows stuff up in the air, and then what's settled out? So, like, all those are what we call particulates. So
Yep.
you have different sizes of particulates. You have mold that it generally is in certain sizes, but we look at all that. So that's kind of how this happens with the air quality. So I've seen it both ways. So again, I still value it, and there's different ways to do it, to give it that value. But again, it's a good place to start,
Yeah.
more
I see.
than the ERMI method. You know?
Right.
So the ERMI is going to get
a
settled
little
for
bit
us.
more information than
Yeah, and it's the
totally.
direct effect. So if something is obvious, it's a great place to start,
Yeah.
knowing its limitations.
Air quality sampling is a great part of the process. It should not be the only part of the process.
Oh, definitely not.
Right?
Never the only.
And then more importantly, it's also about the inspector or the individual doing it. You want to make sure they're experienced and educated so they know how to take in those different contributing factors of like humidity, placement of the test, pressure in the home.
Yeah, building
right?
science. Yep. All of the things that are contributing factors.
You talked about particulates a little bit just now.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we should dig into that a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit more about mold and particulates and kind of like what's actually happening there when we're talking about like mold and the things we can't see but are present.
Yeah, sure. There's something called a moisture scale, number one.
Okay.
That everybody needs to look up, the moisture scale. So,
Moisture scale. Making a note. Looking it up.
make a note.
Yep.
And this applies to anywhere in the world. So you want to know what your relative humidity is
Yep.
right off the bat, especially in a climate like ours, which has high relative humidity in the summers. And then for 3 to 4 months out of the year, we're heating our homes and we're drying things out, and it's doing the opposite. So typically what happens is if we have a source or if we have history in the home, or we just open the door and we bring in from whatever's outside, or we bring it from some other location and we have something that's contaminated, it becomes part of our microclimate. Because that's what we have.
Yep.
We have a microclimate within the home. So we're
see.
growing things within the microclimate, like a petri dish, or things are settled out and dormant from history or from whatever was introduced.
Yep.
So there's viable and non-viable spores. There's particulates that are just related to allergens and viruses and, bacteria, comes into play with that, which it's a very misunderstood thing. There has to be a delivery method.
Okay.
And those particular stuff is on the stuff.
That was so deep.
Yeah, right, yeah. But everything is on something.
Okay.
Right? So is it something that's going to directly affect you? Are you going to have a response to it? Is it going to aggravate the person that is more sensitized more than the people that are fine?
Yep.
Or, genetics comes into play with that. There's a certain gene that doesn't process mold in the same way. So, and that's about 25 to 30% of the population now.
Wow. That's a conversation.
Yeah, that will be. All these things come into play. So understanding the sensitivities of the client, along with being able to measure everything at every size, and then say, what are our potentials here? Let's get our overall load in the house. Again, nothing beats removal, like a deep clean. I tell people twice a year.
Yep.
We tell people like top 7 things, which we can have a whole thing on that. But one of the things is that spring and fall clean. We don't do that as a society anymore. When I grew up, because of all the gray hairs that I got, but
What gray hairs?
yeah,
I don't know
tons
what you
of
mean.
them. But back in my day, it was, hey kids, let's move the furniture and get the rugs and take them outside and beat them out on the clothesline. Right. I'm having a little fun with that, but that was the idea. And that was when the houses were loose. That's when there was a lot of dilution and the house wasn't as tight. So basically when I say that, you get fresh air makeup from just the house not being buttoned up for energy.
Right. It's
So you
not
get some dilution.
that airflow. Things are getting out. They're getting in, but they're also
Think of
getting
it
out.
like this. So if I drink something or if I got poisoned or something, what am I going to do? I'm going to dilute it, right? So
Yep.
it goes through my system, and we want to dilute that influence. So in the same way, that fresh air dilutes an influence
I see.
or some sort of mechanical ventilation or opening a
Yep.
window or whatever. Problem is, you got to know what you're bringing in. So, that's a whole conversation too. But those particulates, that food and water concept, it's just food, right?
Okay.
Generally, it's just food and for mold. So whether that's dead skin cells, whether that's again allergens from outside, whether that's decay particles from the building, whether that's circulated, which typically happens with the HVAC, or whether that's mold growing and sporulating and getting into the air.
Right.
Right? Those spores get in the air. So all those things we need to find ways to mitigate or manage. And so that food and water concept, if we're monitoring our relative humidity and keeping it around 45 to 50% all the time, On that moisture scale that we referred to a long time ago, it's basically a big U. So if you think of it in terms of one side is dry, one side is wet, and these are general concepts, but mostly the fungal and the bacterial is on the wet side, but the viral is generally on the dry side. And that's why I tell people, like, most of the time we're getting sick in the winter. It's not just because it's cold.
Yeah.
It's because the particulates that deliver the viral content and some of the allergens and all that are now dry and the fungal and the bacterial, all that is drier content. So now we have more volume of particulates in the air. That's why all these filters are so popular, because they call them a purifier. And to some degree they are, but it's only like half of the purification process. It's defense.
Yep.
It's a catcher. It's drawing in.
Yep.
And there's different ways to do that, which, we'll probably have a whole podcast on that. But that food and water concept is what you got to manage. So you get the stuff out of your air.
Right.
After you deal with sources, get a better baseline. You get the stuff out of your air, and you manage it better. Then you're monitoring the moisture. So after you deal with influences that are like high influences of moisture, like a leak or HVAC issues or outside issues coming in or condensation issues from insulation, all those things are the coming up from the crawl space or whatever, all those things affect the moisture in the house. So if you manage those two things, your particulate levels now are only so buoyant.
Okay.
So you're going to get what we call equilibrium in the house for moisture. Now you're only managing in the air this much content at these sizes generally.
Right.
Again, unless there's influences specific. And then the rest of it is settled out typically because it's heavier at that buoyancy because of the weight of it, because of the moisture in the air. Then the rest of it gets cleaned. So either you're managing the air or you're cleaning up, right? So that deep clean twice a year we talked about keeps that available stuff that has settled out off those surfaces. So now things don't get stirred up everywhere, or you starts building and building and building, and then all of a sudden we're like, Pigpen from the Peanuts theme.
Exactly.
So I know that's a lot to unpack, but those are the kinds of things that happen and how it happens with that food and water with the particulates. Yep. We always talk about the how, not the what. Yeah. It's not just the what. The more important thing is the how.
Okay, just to clarify, when we're talking about, you touched on it a bit, but I just want our listeners to kind of clearly understand. When you're talking about food and water, we're not talking about literal food and water. We're talking about maybe sometimes, but also like on a molecular level, like what mold is able to feed off of. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, on a particulate size and on building materials, which, that's the food. As an example, like the HVAC.
So like some type of solids.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The HVAC just kicked on.
Yep.
Here. So what's in there? Right? That's a delivery method and a management method.
Who knows? Yeah.
Right? That's one of the reasons that we encourage, again, the how is more important than the what, ductwork cleaning and sanitization of that system, because the history's in there. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And at some point, if it's not managed right or if there's problems with it, it's going to not only be history, but it's going to be food, because the main job of the HVAC, especially in our climate, is to manage moisture, to get to a realized temperature. So it's food and water, and it's in a dark space. And then we're blowing things around. That's typically how that happens. So that's why we refer to the lungs of the home as such an integral part of the indoor air quality. It's the wild card that never gets really addressed.
Okay, this is perfect, because I do want to ask about HVAC systems. Yeah. And how do we manage those? Because they do kind of contribute to the the microenvironment, right? That we talked about in our home. There's also a lot of people haven't had them cleaned in years. That's a contributing factor. So what do we need to know about those systems, how to maintain them so that, it's going to be better in our home?
Yeah, so again, it's kind of a several-pronged approach.
Okay.
You have a return and you have a supply.
I'm here. I'm keeping up.
Right?
Return and supply.
So it's drawing in from the inside of the house.
Yep.
It's taking that air. It's making all the magic happen at that coil. the design of that just mimics our skin, for a lack of a better way of saying it. So
Okay.
we want to sweat, and I'm talking about specifically conditioning at this point, as far as
Right.
air conditioning for the summer.
Yep.
The idea is we're pulling whatever the moisture content is in the air, along with the temperature that's related. We're bringing that air in, and whatever's on that air, or in that air, is coming with it. So that's where we get into filtration. Typically, somebody's going to have, and the most basic is a filter at the wall, right?
Right,
Where it
right.
comes in at the return. So here's how this happens. A moist climate, like ours in Tennessee, and we put a better filter in there.
Yep.
The
Big
main-
old thick ones.
Yeah.
That people
or
love
just
to
a
buy.
high MERV rating. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And again, these are general concepts, but and there's different ways to do MERV rating and all that. But we deal with what we call the static pressure of the system. And so it's designed to have a certain amount of static pressure for the performance of the system to efficiently deal with the moisture, and the moisture goes with the heat in that particular case. It draws out, you get to that dew point on that coil because of how that is designed as far as the compressor and how that compresses the liquid, and then it expands and contracts through that process to create different temperature swings, and that temperature swing along with the temperature from the room
Yep.
creates the dew, right? So because again, the further your temperature swing with the available moisture, you get to dew point quicker or not as quick, depending on all those parameters. Whenever you restrict that with a filter, a better filter, you're slowing that process down, or you're taking percentage of performance down for the system.
Yep.
And so if its main job is to pull moisture, now you're kind of putting the cart before the horse with that food and water concept. You're trying to catch the food before it's designed to get the moisture. So if you're doing that, your performance goes down, your system works harder, your energy bills go up, you wear out your motor quicker, and you
Can't
create
keep
more
up.
condensation within the system and around the system,
This is stressful.
create more mold.
Right.
And if it's not clean, on top
wild.
of it, it's food and water, right?
Yeah,
So
I see.
again, you want things to work in a balanced fashion. What happens is once that sweat's on there, it's supposed to cool by blowing against that temperature differential of the coil, because just like when you run outside and your skin sweats and you feel a cool breeze, you feel comfortable. Hey, I'm not as hot as I was, because
I
heat goes with the
see.
moisture.
Yep.
Right? So in the same manner, the heat's going with the moisture, we're blowing against that coil, and we feel, then it delivers that temperature differential from the blower into a space that's hotter. Now we're getting that cycle,
Yeah.
right? And if they're designed to keep the temperature around 45 to 50%.
Humidity levels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it's a balance. It's like trying to find that sweet spot, working with your system that maybe was under-designed or not designed well, or maybe...
And then your home, the build of your home, right?
So many
Yeah.
factors. And then, of course, the cleaning of this. There's so many studies just by having a clean system, what the efficiency levels are. Like, it pays for itself in 2 years on a lot of systems,
Wow.
just because of the restriction that happens with all the debris.
Yep.
So just from construction alone, you're going to get all the drywall dust, all the junk that's in there, and then it sticks to
Right.
the moisture, right? So all that restricts the airflow. But
So it's a new build, but
It could be,
It
yeah.
has all example for a new build,
Yeah, mhm.
right? They still have all that gunk in there from the construction process potentially.
absolutely. Start fresh, keep it fresh, right? And do it through managing your home so that it's not sucking in debris and dirtying it up again.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
again, it's that holistic approach. So that being the lungs of the home, once we know it's clean and it's operating efficiently and everything is going as intended, it shouldn't get mold in there.
Right. And we typically suggest getting those ducts cleaned every 3 to 5 years.
No, honestly,
what would you suggest?
Well, here's what I'll say. If you got a lot of puppies and you got a full house of people,
Got a lot of puppies, a lot
Yeah.
of fur babies.
yeah, you're going to have a lot more to manage, right?
Yep.
So in that particular case, yeah, maybe 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
But generally, like if there's just a few people in the house is 2,000 square feet, and you don't have a lot of pets or anything like that, maybe 5 to 7.
Okay.
years, something
5 to
like
7.
that. If it's done right, again, it's the how,
Yeah, right.
which we'll have a whole podcast on duct cleaning.
Yeah. So
So-
assuming it's done right, because I just kind of want to get tactical for the listeners. Assuming it's done right, and not a lot of people in the home, maybe every 5 to 7 years. On the front end, if it's a new build, like you want it done on the front end for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if you buy the house,
Yeah.
you have all that history in there.
Yeah. Okay.
If you are renting a house, if you get permission to do that, I would do it. If you have a new build, as soon as they're done, what they tell you is, you're going to get dust for like the first year and a half or 2 years. You're just going to have to clean a little more often.
Right.
No, like I want that stuff out of there. I don't want to breathe
Right.
that for 2.5 years and to still be in my
You're
dust.
just going to be living in a polluted environment for the first 2 to 3 years. It's very normal.
available food.
No worries.
No worries.
Yeah, totally.
Plus all the VOCs that are happening on a new
Okay.
build within a home. Don't even get me started.
So anytime we're moving into a new space, whether it's renting, buying, new build, we definitely want to get that cleaned on the front end.
Better baseline.
Yep, better
Like,
baseline.
Just like manage at the front end. Hey, it's no different than saying, okay, I'm gonna come in here, but I'm not gonna clean the floors.
right.
It's settled out. It's on the floor. It's not in my airspace. Right. So why wouldn't you clean that?
Right.
It's the same. I
Yeah.
mean, in fact, I would argue even more important.
Well, it's the lungs of the home, right? Whatever's in there is pumping into your
your
air.
lungs.
Yes, exactly.
House's lungs, your lungs.
Yeah, I mean, you could not be a smoker and still it's a pretty bad situation if
Yeah.
you've got terrible ductwork. Okay, well, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about history of the home because we're kind of moving in that direction. How do we need to take those types of things into consideration where we're thinking about mold and air quality and, how old is this house and how is that going to play into, like, what should I know? What should I be asking?
So during that screening, it's going to start with that. Why are they calling us? We know all the potentials are there, and we've got potential for lead. We've got a potential for asbestos. We've got history of those things related to the HVAC, depending on how old that system is, and the ductwork. We've got history within the substrate and the wood. We've got all those potentials out there. So we're mindful of what we're walking into. However, it should theoretically be a looser home, so meaning it's not as energy efficient typically, or if it has been tightened up, that creates other problems. We're just kind of mindful of all those things, but having a good screening, having a good inspection on the front end with environmentally minded inspectors, and then if you're just wanting an environmental inspection separate, where we're really focusing on all those contaminants, we would get into that space. And then, again, if there's a concern, if there's smells associated, there's always smells.
I see.
Smells are associated, again, with particulates.
Well,
and
you
a lot
can
of other
smell.
things.
You've got a wild nose.
Well, and that's how I do all my testing.
No, we get the real
nose
numbers.
knows.
No, but you will walk into a house and you'll be like, smell that. And I'm like, I do not smell that.
Right,
I don't know
yeah.
what we're talking about. Yeah.
Right. So, but typically that history is associated with something, and that smell could be
Yeah.
a contaminant, or it could be just debris that maybe doesn't influence people in the home as much. They process it well. But the idea is your house should smell neutral. Like, it shouldn't have a smell.
Right.
So between the off-gassing of things, between different products that were used
Yep.
historically that aren't approved today, or improvements that have happened, they bring in a couch from someplace.
Yeah.
That couch has history,
Right.
whatever the case is. There's so many different reasons for that smell to be
Yep.
an issue. We'll be mindful of that when we go into that place. And then again, we're looking for all of that history to say, do we need to sample? What type of sampling do we need? And then again, what are the pain points of the person that's there? What are the influences?
Okay.
Just with a good inspection on the house.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered a lot today.
Yeah.
We're going to kind of wrap up there. This is definitely going to be a continued conversation. There's so many questions to ask and understand more of. I have a list of questions that I keep getting from you guys. So we'll continue to revisit those periodically with these Q&A episodes. Barry Mankin, this has been lovely today.
Great job.
Thank you so much. Guys, Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.